In this lesson, we're looking how to sketch a graph, and these graphs are the trig functions, and we're going to need to draw a table, and the x values will be 30, 60, 90, 120, etc. The horizontal numbers, put them into a table, substitute, and plot the values. We're going to start with the graph f. Graph f is 2 cos x. 2 cos 30 degrees, 1,73. 2 cos 60 degrees, 2 cos 90 degrees. 2 cos 120 degrees, 2 cos 150 degrees. 2 cos 210 degrees, 2 cos 240 degrees, 2 cos 270 degrees, 2 cos 300 degrees, 2 cos 330 degrees, 2 cos 360 degrees. Notice I left out 0. I did that because there's the light shining on the board. Okay, so now we're going to have to work on 2 cos 0 degrees. At 0 we will get 2. At 30, 1,73 is y. Plot it. Then at 60 we get 1. At 90 we get 0. When x is 120 degrees we get minus 1. When x is 150 degrees, we get minus 1,73. At 180, we get minus 2. Do correct 180, it should be minus 2. At 210, minus 1,73. At 240, minus 1. At 240, it's 0. At 270, it's 0. At 300, it is 1. At 330, 1,7, and at 360 it is 2. Join all the dots. Notice it must be curvy. Most likely in exams this will be grid paper, so it'll be far easier to do compared to what I'm doing here. Right, in the bottom row on the grid we're going to do gx is equal to sine x plus 30. So substitute 0, we're going to get sine of 30. The next one will then be sine of 60, and so forth. Do check yours, see if you're on the right track. Next one will be sine 90 plus 30, so it's going to be sine 120, the next square. Okay, so sine of 210 is negative 0,5. The next one now at 210, it'll actually be sine 240 because we're adding 30 to all the values on the top. Now it's all our values substituted. Those are values. So now we're going to use 0 and 0.5. If we go to x is 0, we're going to plot 0,5. 0,5 is practically a positive half. Notice the next one is 0,87. We're looking at the red. 0,87 is slightly more than a half. At 60 we have 1. At 90 we have 0,87. At 120 we have 0,5, which is a half. At 150 we have 0. 180 negative half. 210 negative 0,87. 240 we have minus 1. At 270 negative 0,87. At 300 we have negative a half. 330 we have 0. And 360 we have a half. Right, it's all plotted up. We need to join the lines. Notice it must be curvy. That is the graph. G of x is equal to sine, open brackets, x plus 30. The marking here is normally for the intercepts where it crosses the x-axis, and also for the turning points in some cases, and the shape of the graph. It has the correct shape. Right, you're answering 3.2. F of x is equal to g of x. What does this mean? It practically means where do the two graphs meet up? Where do they intersect? Where do they cut each other? So look at it on the graph, look for it on the graph, and determine that x value of where the two graphs meet. If we draw vertical lines to the x-axis, we can clearly read off the graph. We can see it's at 60 and 240 degrees. But the beautiful part about drawing the grid, like how I've done in the bottom here, you can clearly see from the values that are the same, you will know at which x values they meet. I've circled them on the table. Looking at the question 3.3, when it comes like this, it's somewhat very confusing. All it is saying is multiply the two graphs, and when multiplying them, you must get an answer that is either 0 or positive. So notice that is the more than sign. The bottom line indicates equal to 0, but the sign on the top, the one I've marked with the arrow, red arrow, that means more than, which means positive. So they're saying when you multiply the two graphs, you must get a positive answer. You practically read this off from the graph itself. But there's also a limitation when it comes to the domain. Notice the question said draw the graph for x is 0 and 270. 0 and 360. So it said draw the graph for x is the elements of 0 and 360. But 3.3 is saying 0 and 300. Do note that difference. So answering this question will only look up to the green line. So the question could have been written in this way. Okay, so notice that f of x is equal to 2 cos x and g of x is equal to sine, open brackets, x plus 30. So the question could be written like this: f of x dot g of x, which means times, is more than or equal to 0. So this means multiply the two graphs and you must get either an answer that's equal to 0 or more than 0. Looking at the blue graph, we can see at this point, this is where the blue graph is above the x-axis, meaning that the whole part of that blue graph is positive. And notice, if we multiply the whole of the blue graph times the red graph up to that point of 90 degrees, we will get a positive answer. If we go anything to the right beyond 90 degrees, we will get a negative answer. Because if the blue graph is in the negative part, negative times a positive is a negative, which means it won't satisfy the question asked. So up to 90, this is where multiplying the two graphs, we will still get a positive answer. Notice up to that point, both red and blue are positive. Okay, there is two ways of how we can write that answer. Remember that a square bracket means including the 0 and the 90. Okay, so that is our answer for 3.3 written in red. But it's not the only answer. There is another place on the diagram, pause the video and think about it, where the two graphs when multiplied will give us a positive answer. Do note that a negative times a negative will be positive. So look where both the graphs are in a negative region. If we look at the red graph at 150, it starts to go into the negative. And if we notice the blue graph at 270, it starts to go into the positive. So that's where it's limited to. Okay, at 150, it's already in the negative. That is the blue graph. But it ends at 250. It's negative cycle. So that would be our answer. Okay, the answer there is in green. It's one of those two, either the top notation or the bottom notation. Any one will work. Right, next we are going to look at 3.4. 3.4 question, I'm just going to have to read it out because there's no space to write on the board here. The question reads, for which values of x does sine x plus 30 increase as the y value increases? Okay, so which values of x? But we're looking at the graph x plus 30. This is going to be the red graph. So which values of x, up to where in x is the graph increasing? Okay, that's what we need to look at. Where does the graph increase? Pause the video, do attempt it. Right, in the diagram I've marked it with orange, and on the graph you'll notice between 0 and 60 degrees, this is where the graph increases. Notice also between 240 and 360, the red graph starts to increase. What do we mean by increase? We mean that the graph moves in an upward direction. Okay, so notice at 240 is the lowest point, and then the graph starts to turn in an upwards direction. 3.4, notice the answers on the bottom left corner of the screen of the board. You notice you require both answers to get the full marks. Okay. In this example, we are drawing cos x minus 45. So the question says sketch f of x and g of x. So notice the grid will come in 45 intervals. Right, substituting the first one, substitute 0, we'll get cos minus 45, we'll get 0,7. Cos of 0 will be 1. Cos 45 will be 0, cos 90 is 0. Cos 135 is 0, negative 0, cos 150 negative 0,87. Cos 225 negative 0,7. Cos 27 is 0. Cos 215, cos 315, 0,7. Let's plot it. Plotting the first 3 points, we have 0,7, 1, and 0,7, all on the positive. That is for 0, 45, and 90. Plotting the next 3, we have 0, minus. At 225, it's minus 1. Please note, at 225, it's minus 1. At 180 is negative 0,7. At 270, negative 0,7. 315 is 0. And 360, 0,7. We will then join up all the points. That's what our graph looks like for f of x. Now we have to do the other graph, negative 2. So notice a negative 2 means the graph is going to be inverted because it's a negative. So all you have to do is substitute in there 0 degrees, 45 degrees, get your answers and plot it. Okay, so for our first point, when x is 0, we'll get 0. Substitute 45, we're going to get sine 90 times minus 2. We're going to get an answer of minus 2. The next one is sine 2 times 90. That will be sine 180 times minus 2. Guys, if we times it by 180, if we times it by minus 2, we're going to get 0. And so our graph starts to form like that. Continue substituting, see what you get. Alright, finishing it off, the graph will look like that. Okay, and notice we have two graphs for the domain of 360. So within this domain from 0 to 360, we have two. That number in the equation gives us an indication of how many graphs we will see. So we are saying that the graph repeats itself at 180. Alright, so 3.2's question says the range of g. So the range means the y values. So all you have to do is establish between which upper y and lower y does this graph. So this graph lies between 2 and minus 2. So notice the negative is always on the left when you write this. Okay, that is the range written like that. Okay, next question. Next question is the period of g. Now the period is just where the graph starts to repeat. So make a line where the graph starts to repeat as shown in the diagram. We notice at 180 the graph starts to repeat itself. So the period will be 180. We can also find the period by saying 360 divided by the number in front of x. Okay, please note my scale is not too accurate because I drew this freehand without having proper measurements. So notice that the first graph, right, the amplitude is 1. So f of x, the amplitude is 1. So notice the graph would be somewhere there. Alright, so now the question here for 3 for 1 is showing f of x minus g of x is equal to 1. So you have to look where is the graph 2 units apart from each other. 1 unit apart from each other. So look on the graph and see where you can find a gap of just 1 unit. Remember, yours will be drawn to scale because you used grid paper. Our answer will be at x is equal to 2 to 5. So this is where subtracting the two y's, we'll get a unit of 1 unit. Okay, so f of x minus g of x means y value minus y value must equal 1 unit. That's the only place on the graph where you'll get that. So at x is equal to 2 to 5, So at x is equal to 2 to 5, this is where you will get that 1 unit between the graphs. Please excuse my diagram. I had to draw a little smaller so I could fit everything on here, and as a result the drawing is not so accurate. Now looking on your diagram, 3, 4, 2, where the one graph subtract the other graph will give you 3 units. See if you can find that. Don't worry about the negative sign, just look where you can count 3 units. Okay, our answer there is when x is equal to 45. Okay, 343 means f of x is less than or more than 0. What is it saying in a nutshell? Look at the graph f and see where it is negative, below the x-axis or equal to 0, touching the x-axis. Notice it's 135 and 315. So between those two, that's where the graph is touching and below the x-axis. Okay, that's our answer in red. 344's question. 344 is saying multiply the two graphs, you must get a positive answer or equal to 0. So f of x dot g of x is more than or equal to 0 means that it must be positive, must be greater than 0 or equal to 0. That means it must be positive or 0. But notice they gave us a limitation on the domain. They're saying between 0 and 180. Only look there. So only look from the orange line to 0. Okay, so x values, look from the orange line, that's 180 all the way to 0. Okay, and that will be between 90 and 135. Notice there's two notations. You can use the other notation as well. Okay, I think I'll just leave it at 2 examples. Hopefully you caught it. Alright, it's going to take some practice, so refresh yourself before a test.